Hello again, this is Bill Lindeman with Mike Seibert and the Blue Seahorse Show. And we have a theme taking from a chapter of your book, What Role Did I Play? Volume 2. And you've picked for today's show, perception. And that's a pretty deep subject. So yeah, I know there's a statement about sometimes it's the first glimpse you have of somebody that is the most important, the very first second. So you want to tell us about it?
All right, Bill.
Okay.
Well, when working with young people, and good evening,
Good evening. Yeah.
working with young people, we get into a lot of discussions about I don't like her, or I don't like him, or I don't like that person. And when you ask why, they really don't have a reason why. And we get down, like you said, very deep. We get into their perception of that person. And that person may dress not quite like they dress, may have some mannerisms that are uncomfortable to them.
Yes.
So they form an impression right away. They form a perception of what they think that person is without getting to know them. And like you said, it's a chapter from my book. And if I can start out with the beginning of the chapter, it says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change,
Right.
which is perception. How many of us judge a person by how they look and act without taking the time to get to know them? Well, we do that a lot. And as you mature, you start to look at things a little different. You want to hope we start looking at things a little differently.
Yes.
So when you look at a person and you see they're down and out, or whatever the situation they present themselves to be to you, as we get older, we start to say, okay, maybe they don't look quite right, but what did it take to get them in that state? So we try not to be judgmental, but we all are judgmental, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. We all make judgments, very snap judgments. As you said earlier, the first seconds that you meet someone or see someone, you form an opinion.
First impression.
First impression.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're fairly accurate, but they're more accurate the older you get. The more you mature, the more your first impressions are more open. They're open for interpretation. They're open for whatever reason. It's when you're young, first of all, your impressions are formed by your peer group. Well, we don't like these people.
That's true, yes.
You know, we don't like that person, or we don't like you. You know, an older person would ask, well, where did that we come from? Don't put me in there, because I can make my own mind up. Kids with their need, young children and young teens with their need to have friends, because nobody likes to be alone. So their need to have friends, they tend to go with the group mentality. And they might have 2 or 3 in their peer group, or the little cliques as we used to call them. Or there might be 10 or 12 in the clique. They will all have a same mannerism. It's like they say, water seeks its own level. So if you find a person who is similar to your ideals and ideology in life, you will tend to gravitate towards them.
Right.
You find someone maybe with the equal economic status as you will gravitate towards them. If you ask a group of friends every time, well, let's stop by the candy store, or let's stop by the store and buy something, and the same person continually says, well, I can't because I can't afford it, they will soon be on the outs of that group, because the group is forming a perception of them now that they're poor.
Right.
And that's the limit of their mentality, and it's a shame to say that.
Sure.
But it is a limit of their mentality. And, you know, the story goes on to say, the cowboy poet Will Rogers once said, I never met a man I didn't like. Well, you know, I hear comments about, well, that means he liked everybody. Well, at first glances and perceptions, he probably didn't, because sometimes people's mannerisms put people off. But it says that he took time to get to know people.
Right.
And when you take the time to get to know people, you then form a different opinion than you would have if you were judgmental to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think back on some of my earlier days as an early married man, young married man. I used to work on the ocean in the oil rigs,
Okay.
and I would be gone sometimes 3-4 months at a time. And this went on for like 20
Wow,
years.
That's a long period.
Well, yeah, it was pretty rewarding, but it was.
Sure.
But I was gone for a long time. It was
Yeah.
what the jobs were in those days.
Mhm.
It goes back a long time. I don't think they're that linked anymore, but they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this for almost 20 years. So in the earlier days of my children, all the trouble they got into with mom was sort of put into a jar.
Okay.
And you wait till your dad gets home.
Yeah.
You wait till your dad gets home.
Yeah.
Well, they got 3 months of waiting till dad gets home. They didn't know whether they were going to be killed, run over, hung, drawn, and quartered, or
Sure.
or hugged.
Sure.
They didn't know. Their perception of me was that I was the punisher,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife cultivated that perception.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't her intention to cultivate that perception, because she had to live with them without a husband and without a father for the children
Mhm.
for 3 months at a time. So her goal was to keep peace. So she wasn't the disciplinarian, unless it had to happen at the time,
Mhm.
something drastic or whatever. But most stuff stayed in limbo until dad got home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was
Right.
supposed to go and get the switches and get the pants and
Sure.
get the belts
Sure.
and start handing out the discipline.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't do that. Not all the time. Sometimes I supported her and grounding them here or grounding them there, but you know, to get physical with them, I didn't find that was appropriate on something that was 3 months old
Mm-hmm.
or 2 months old. First of all, they probably wouldn't remember what they did.
Yeah, well, time heals. I mean, it should be done immediately, you know.
Well, they forget. Mom didn't forget. They forgot.
Of course.
They got on with their lives.
Sure.
So it was a difficult situation. But their perception was, and we've talked later in life, that I was the punisher. I was the guy that was going to come home and be the mean guy. In the first couple days I was home, they were really nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't have to be, and they didn't learn that till later in life,
Yes.
because there wasn't anything going to happen
Mm-hmm.
unless it was something major they did that I had to pay for when I got home.
Yes.
But outside of that, and that was their perception, and that was generated by their mother with all good intentions, but it was generated by them.
Mm-hmm.
Our perception of people is what creates so much bias in the world, I think.
Mhm.
And right now, the perception out there with all the world news that's going on is that there's a class of people and a religion of people overseas that are all bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the perception is, to most of us that are a little younger maybe, that watch the TV, all that particular class of people or group of people, whether they're in Asia anywhere or
Uh-huh.
Europe or the Middle East, that this particular group are all bad guys and this particular group are all good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. I was fortunate enough to live in a lot of those countries,
Mm-hmm.
in Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and
Okay.
Kuwait.
Okay.
And I've lived in Egypt, and I've lived over in that area. And there's a lot of, that's like us over here. You know, there's a lot of people over here I wouldn't associate with if you paid
Sure.
me.
Sure.
But there's people over here, there's a lot of nice people. And given the opportunity, they want to be nice.
Sure.
But our perception of them on the television is none of them are nice.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the good guys and the bad guys. Well, that's pure perception. And that's fostered. It's allowed to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can take the Palestinians and the Israelis, and you know, they're really just a lot of people trying to raise families and make a living. Most of them don't really care about all the nonsense that their leaders tell them. You know, they really just want to live in peace and have jobs and go to get schooling.
Well,
If they had a choice, you know, they wouldn't fight each other.
No,
You know.
no. But there are radicals in every race.
Sure.
There are radicals American. There's radical Americans out there.
Sure.
and there's a lot of radicals overseas. They tend to be a bit more dramatic
Mhm.
because of their attitude and their atmosphere on how they express themselves.
Mhm.
They're a bit more vocal and a bit more dramatic, but still, there's great people and there's some radical people out
Yeah.
there. The thing that I learned a lot about, and we had to be cautious of, because when we went into these foreign countries to live and work, there was a lot of rules that we didn't know about. And you can't live and walk and talk like an American in some of these countries. You have to, it's their country, their rules, their laws.
Sure.
And you just can't grab a beer and walk out the street and start walking down the street, man. Somebody will have you in a heartbeat.
When in Rome, huh? When in Rome.
Definitely, very definitely
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah.
I remember one time when I was working on the oil rig, and we'd finished a really hard job, and we'd worked hard for days and days and days. And when it was over, we decided to have fun. So because we were the divers of the group, we were the only ones allowed to jump in the water. The rest
Okay.
of the riggers couldn't go, they couldn't jump in the water.
Uh-huh.
Insurance and liability and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
So we were jumping in and out of the water and having a good time, just relaxing. And we had a couple local people that were our helpers. They were assigned to us
Mhm.
to help. And we thought, well, let's get them involved too,
Mhm.
because they helped us a lot. And they worked as many hours as we did, and they worked as hard as we did.
Mhm.
So we got most of them to jump in the water with us and play, but this one guy wouldn't.
Mhm.
And we thought, oh, we'll just drag him in the water and have fun with him and just play. Well, he wouldn't go. And I got on one side of the handrail, and another guy got on the other side of the handrail with him, and we're trying to lift him over this handrail and throw him in the water.
Yeah.
And I looked at his face for 1 second, and I saw a look on his face that said, stop. So we stopped, and I said, put him down. Put him down. We're not going there. What we caused him to do was to lose face in front of his other friends. So we put him down, and he went back to all of his other friends.
Mhm.
They gathered in a little powwow and talked. And because of and I was the supervisor, I was in charge of the job.
Okay. Yeah.
So because of one action of mine, which was all good intentions, they shut the job down
Wow.
completely.
Wow.
And here's a multi-million-dollar a day operation on a barge that has 200 people on it with tugboat supports and all kinds of stuff,
Mhm.
shut down because Mike didn't think.
Mhm.
And it took all day to negotiate, and I had to go up in front. They lined up on the deck, and we were all facing each other like two armies. And I had to step forward and apologize for my behavior and my lack of thought.
Mhm.
And I was told what to say by their leader. He said, you need to do this or we're going to stop work.
Mhm.
And I had to go up to him and apologize to him in front of everybody and give him his face back. Because
Sure,
to them,
sure.
that was really important. They were really proud people. And I had to give him his face back and humble myself in front of him to make him some stamina, some semblance of power in front of the group.
Sure.
When that was all done, they agreed to come back to work. But he wouldn't come to work for us, and that was fine. We agreed, it's not a good thing.
Mhm.
So somebody else from his group volunteered to come and work for us, and we were fine after that. But perception was that we were embarrassing him.
Mhm.
And the two different cultures together, without understanding the philosophy of their lives between the two, caused a huge problem.
I'm assuming that the companies that do business like that know better now. They're more sensitive to that sort of thing.
Well, they are, and that became an issue that we talked
Yeah.
about from every time we went to a new place.
Mhm.
But if you take that a step further, those are the kind of things that start wars.
Of course. Sure they do.
The perception of what we were doing to their friend and their citizen,
Mhm.
I don't know what would have happened if we'd have got him in the water.
Wow.
There might have been some,
Yeah.
because these guys were not afraid of a head-up confrontation.
Mhm.
They were pretty strong guys.
Mhm.
But there was a perception on both parts. We just wanted to have fun. We were through. They didn't. The perception was we made him lose face. We embarrassed him in front of his friends. and it didn't work out at all. In the end, it was okay. Perception is a very dangerous thing.
That's a good story, a good way of illustrating it. Yeah.
And it's a true story, which makes it more impactful.
Sure.
And I can tell that story with emotion because I'm the one that caused the problem. I'd hate to, today you look back on it, and even they would probably laugh a little bit. But it wasn't funny at the time. It was dead serious. And it says further, if we take time and change the way we look at things and others, the things and others we look at will change. And that just comes with experience and age and maturity. I like to see young people look at this and say, yeah, that's what we got to do. And maybe this could be a class discussion in a 9th grade or 10th grade or 11th grade. But younger than that, I don't see many people worrying about anything other than themselves right now. They're surviving. The perception of most kids is, I've got to get through this year. And I have to do it without getting bullied, picked on, failing, or whatever, and still be out there to make a name for myself and to have people want to be my friend. Because the perception of a friendless person is sad. A sad, sad state. And that's why there's so many issues with young kids in school one who has trouble making friends. He may have a communication problem or maybe a physical disability of some sort. Nothing wrong with his brain. He just has maybe an issue. The perception is he's not equal to everybody. And young kids and they're terrible. You know that. Young kids say horrible things to people, to each other. And it's not meant to do the damage it does.
Well, what makes it worse is they learn that from their parents.
Well, they do, and that's where part of this goes to. And all my stories are about what children learn. You learn that kind of stuff at home. How do you sit at night and after dinner, or even at dinner, or watching a TV show, or playing a game, whatever, and hear your parents talking? You can almost sit in the living room in their mind and listen to them. Parents talk about the co-workers. They talk about a raw deal they got at work. They talk about their boss. They talk about some person who's maybe a bit more flirtatious, or maybe a bit more withdrawn, or maybe overweight, or a young person who's bald. They talk about these people in the context of their home.
Right.
So that's where children see that. Well, if my parents do it, it's got to be okay.
Yeah.
And the difficulty I find with a lot of young people I work with is to have them come to terms with their parents were wrong. The only two people or one person, depending on the family, that they trusted to raise them correctly, it's a subconscious thought, it's not a conscious thought, but they trusted to raise them correctly, to have them become members of society, were wrong. And that's tough. That's a hard pill to swallow. Who, from a young boy or young girl who is prejudiced, and their perception of people are made on the judgments that their parents have. And I know even some young people that I talk to say, I don't think I'm supposed to like that person, but I do. You know? It's a struggle. Now they're struggling to keep people, well, you even heard parents say that, well, you know, the Joneses down the street, they're not nice people. They drive an old car, they don't take care of their lawn, there's trash all the time in the front. You know, we don't really want to associate with those people because the perception is if we do that we're like them. Well, the young children in the family may like their young children. They may be friends at school. But how do you deal with that when your parents don't like the parents of your friends? What a struggle that is for young children to be put into.
And confusing, I'm sure.
It's very confusing, and they shouldn't have to be put in that spot. But we do that all, and I'm sure I probably did it too when I was younger. As a young father and a young husband, I'm pretty confident I did until I grew up a little bit and learned. because I lived in a foreign country for so long.
Right.
Sometimes even the perception that I'm in a foreign country, I'm the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really felt racism or prejudice in this country when I was younger. But when I was living in Asia, is one of the few white families in a proverbial Asian neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
You stand out.
Yes.
You do things, all of a sudden you're out there in the morning in a bathing suit washing the car and everybody's staring at you. Well,
Yeah.
you know, you don't do that in their country.
I see.
If you're going to wash your car, you get dressed. You don't get undressed.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I was out there with my children,
Sure.
all in bathing suits, washing the car, having a good time. And next thing you know, we got all kinds of people coming around and said, you know, this is our neighborhood. You want to go in and put some clothes on. Oh.
Sure, they're offended by it, and you can't understand it.
And they were offended.
Sure.
Luckily, I'd moved around enough in the Asian countries that I knew right away not to question it at that point and go in and get dressed.
Sure, yeah.
And it's difficult because perception again was I was a heathen.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Right. Sure.
you know, I didn't want to be that.
Yeah.
So once I did what they asked me to do without question,
Mm-hmm.
it showed respect to them.
Right.
So their perception of me grew
Mhm.
because I showed them respect right away. Perception is a something I don't think parents teach the young children very much about at all. And I don't know if it's even taught as it's a theory, it's an idea. Do we teach that in school? I don't think so.
No,
Uh-huh.
not specifically. No.
And it's such an important thing in world events and even in today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the shooting in, I forget what, Minneapolis or somewhere, or
St. Louis.
St. Louis, the perception is already, because they made a big issue of it,
Mm-hmm.
predominantly African American community, with a white police force with only 3 or 4 African American policemen.
Sure.
The perception is something's wrong with that picture.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, there's probably nothing wrong with that picture,
Mm-hmm.
but it gets out of control so fast because people react without thinking, and that's a tinderbox ready to explode.
Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't.
Yeah. You're right.
Going on.
Well, look what's happening in Syria and in Iraq.
Oh wow.
Some madman wants to bring back an Islamic caliphate from medieval era, just like Pol Pot tried to do in Cambodia. Bring back a medieval concept, and it doesn't matter how many people are killed. You know, you'll do it because I want it. The sad thing is we allow people to gather that kind of power and keep them in power. Power should be taken away from them very early.
Well,
That's insane.
it usually does happen that way.
Yeah.
Power gets taken away, but after a lot of death, a lot of suffering, a lot of consequences, then the world steps up and says, okay. Nobody wants to be perceived to be the world bully, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I was thinking, and I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get on, but if I say too much on the show, but about Putin in Africa, in Russia,
Yeah.
with his
Ukraine,
ideas about life.
Sure, yeah.
It goes back to what we talked about in here one day. The only tool I got's a hammer. Everything looks like a nail.
There you go. That's a good way of putting it.
That's my view of him. Is he doesn't have any more tools. He's got big hammers, and that's all he wants to use is a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
Everything to him looks like a nail.
Very interesting. Very interesting, yeah. It's
I've
perceptive.
got some ideas about that, but we won't go much further
Sure.
into that. We want
Sure.
to talk about perception on the home front.
Mhm.
It says if we choose the role in life of not being a judgmental person, we will then be open to discovery of new things. We are open to new things and experiences. It will make us better people. As adults, we must view as many different options in life as we can, and a big one is to look at things with an open mind and be fair when forming opinions of others.
Mhm.
You know, it's like Will Rogers. If you
Sure.
took time to get to know people and understand where they're coming from, you have a totally different opinion than you would have when you first met them.
Mhm.
A lot of people, through difficulties in life, have built little walls up in front of them
Mhm.
so they don't get hurt anymore.
Right.
And they've been hurt enough in their heart and disappointed
Mhm.
in their life,
Mhm.
and they start not to trust people. Well, if you get to know that person, it's probably a very nice person. Could be an artist, could be a singer, could be any kind of professional person in the world, but they've got a wall up what makes them look unfriendly. Because if they get too close,
Mhm.
then they get hurt. Because
Yes.
they're very sensitive people.
Mhm.
So the perception is, well, that's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? A very shy person or a very standoffish person. You know, they don't come to the Christmas parties. They don't meet at the water cooler for a.
They probably think they think they're superior to me, you know,
Yeah, they won't talk to me.
but that's not the way they see it at all.
No, they don't. They're afraid of getting hurt.
Sure. Yeah.
They're afraid of getting too close to people.
Mhm.
And it takes most of us time to get to know people, to say, come out, let's have a cup of coffee, let's sit down.
Mhm.
And don't become too involved to start off with. Just cover the grounds, the basic life skill. The weather's okay, and you know, it's wintertime's coming, and it's been a cool summer, and you know,
Yeah.
don't get too close until they start to open up. But it takes a skill on our parts as seniors and older people to teach the young people that, which we're not doing. I don't think we're doing that at all.
One of the things I've learned from this show, the perception, is that we really need to take time to learn other people as individuals and as cultures, and find our commonalities. You know, what's common to us, how
Well,
much we're alike.
It is, and you're right. And you talk about taking time. It just seems like there's less and less time.
Yeah.
I went, had an emergency last week, and a friend of mine's wife died, and she was very young. She was only 35.
Mm-hmm.
And we went down to Arkansas for the funeral. And we drove back, and we stopped at one of our other friends' house, who was the father of my friend. And we're all sitting around after dinner in the living room. There's like 6 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked around, and everybody's on their cell phone or their iPads.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's talking.
Yeah.
Not one person was talking, and I was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a couple phone calls, and I was answering them back.
Mm-hmm.
And the perception of that group from an outsider would have been horrifying.
Right. Yeah.
I can just imagine sitting in the other side of the room and looking at that group of people
Mm-hmm.
and say, what a bunch of self-centered, egotistical people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't talk to each other. They only got their own little problem right in their
That's
hand.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Technology today is wonderful. I love it, and I use it all the time. But it's also depersonalizing, I think. It's
Sure.
depersonalizing a lot of people.
Yeah, it depends on how you use it. I mean, I get people on Facebook that are very right-wing, and others are very left-wing, and they're blasting each other constantly. I just stay away from it.
Yeah.
I don't answer it. You know, it's just how you use technology. A lot of it is used for communication, which is positive. But the thing is to stay away from the bad stuff. And we need to learn about each other and be more responsible.
Well, I think a lot of times too, Facebook, and I use it a lot as well, but people use that, and their perception is, I can say what I feel without getting my face out there.
Sure.
I can
Sure.
I can express myself
Yeah.
without being ridiculed.
Well, I think we're out of time, so,
Oh, no.
yeah. I mean, we didn't even scratch the surface on this subject. So it's perception, and I'm sure we'll come back to it again.
Oh, we will.
So this is the Blue Seahorse Show. This is Bill Lindeman with Mike Cyber. And we'll be back next week with another subject equally interesting. I'm sure of that.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Sure, Mike. We'll see you.